Let's talk about the authorization for cannabis for medical use and look at why it's not a prescription and it's more a recommendation. It's definitely different than cannabis or than regular prescription medication within Canada. So the word prescription is replaced with the word medical document for the authorization. So when someone goes to a medical doctor and they often use that language, I'm looking to get a prescription to use cannabis. That's not technically accurate because there is no prescription to use cannabis. There is a medical document that authorizes a person to use cannabis, and that medical document can only be issued by a medical healthcare practitioner, which in the majority of provinces and territories, it is a medical doctor, and in some provinces and territories, and this is changing all the time, you might have a nurse practitioner, which is kind of like a registered nurse who's taking a master's degree, and in some provinces, nurse practitioners are allowed to recommend cannabis use or provide a medical document for cannabis use in Canada. Cannabis products do not have a DIN number, so all pharmaceutical drugs that are sold in Canada have a DIN number. DIN stands for Drug Identification Number, and you'll see that DIN number kind of listed on the label. Often it's in fairly small print, but it is legally required to be there. We'll also find a lot of healthcare practitioner products that are sold in health food stores will have an NPN number, so that stands for a natural product number. There is a numbering system that is being talked about to kind of give cannabis products a little bit more legitimacy in the same way that drug identification number does for pharmaceuticals and the NPN number does for supplements sold in Canada. But that's not any kind of a law right now in August of 2020 when we're videoing this, and we'll do some updates as that changes. That could change over the next few years. So right now, the DIN, or the Drug Identification Number, is replaced with a provincial excise stamp. So every person who wishes to package cannabis products would be required to hold a cannabis license issued under the Act, and you need that license in order to purchase the excise stamp, and the excise stamp is legally required to be on the packaging of the products that you're selling. So that's how Health Canada is kind of minding that rule, is that they will only sell those excise stamps to a licensed producer who has been legally authorized to produce cannabis products for sale in the Canadian marketplace. Now, there has been, especially in the beginning, there has been reports of counterfeit excise stamps, but let's just take a quick look at what the requirements are on that excise stamp, and you can look for things to look for. So you'll see here, I'm on the Canada website. If you, the link is on for this website is in the presentation, but you can also just go to a search engine and search for Canada Cannabis Excise Stamp or Provincial Excise Stamp. And they have some guidelines here or some information here about what that looks like. So we'll just walk through this. There's an anti-copy line work here. So again, this is not a flat piece of paper. There is some textile to it or texture to it in the same way that we have a little bit of texture on our on our paper money. So that helps to stop some of the counterfeiting that's happening there. There's this color shift ink that happens here. Again, that just makes it a little bit harder to reproduce. The stamp type, this one says tobacco, but it's the same, that will say cannabis on it. And then the jurisdiction is that will have the provincial letters on there, so AB for Alberta, NB for New Brunswick, those kinds of things. It'll just say duty paid Canada on there, and then there'll be a unique identifier that will be based on the licensed producer number there as well. So that's just a quick thing to look for, is the excise stamp that will be on all products that are legally sold both through the medical system and the retail stores. You want to look for that excise stamp on there. So your medical document is expressed in grams per day, which is really confusing for a lot of people because they think that that's how much they have to take. So if a medical professional does an authorization for 5 grams a day, we've had patients say like, oh, am I supposed to be taking 5 grams of cannabis a day? So the grams per day does not relate at all to what the dosage is. The grams per day is based on a patient's buying limits, how much they can purchase every 30 days from a licensed producer. So if the doctor has authorized 2 grams a day, we will take that, we'll times that 2 times 30 days, and we'll get 60 grams. So that's legally how many grams of product a cannabis user can purchase every 30 days. So again, this might be something that you need to explain to a patient or a client who is just getting themselves into the medical system, because it can be quite confusing for some people. Now, the grams per day, how much you can buy, that also doesn't mean that you have to buy that amount. You will never be asked to enter into a contract with a licensed producer. You're never under any obligation to buy or use a certain amount of cannabis every month. You just buy what you need when you need it. And that might be an important thing to explain to clients as well. Okay, what are the recommended dosage? So there's no prescribed amount. So on pharmaceutical products that come with a prescription, the doctor will always say, you know, take 2 tablets 3 times a day, or you know, this amount 2 to 3 times a day, or as needed, those kinds of things. So those are quite prescribed amounts that people need to do. For cannabis use, again, because everybody reacts to cannabis differently, everyone requires a different amount. So your dosage is going to be a recommendation, not a you must do this. Now, every once in a while, you may come across a doctor who is working with a patient who has a very specific medical condition, and the doctor wants to do some very tight controls over what the patient is taking, and so the doctor will recommend, I want you to take 25 milligrams of CBD 3 times a day for 3 months without a break. And so if that is the recommendation that has come from the doctor, that's, as an educator working with the doctor's recommendation, we do have to make sure that the client understands that. So recommendation of dosage for THC will always start at a lower dose, and then we would titrate them up. We'll talk about titration of products in a minute. So again, we always want to know, if we're working for a clinic, we always want to know what are their standard starting doses, because most clinics will have that, and how do you recommend that they titrate that up, because every doctor, every clinic might have different guidelines around that. But just know, it's really important to know that it is a recommended dosage. It is not a prescribed must take this amount at these times of day as well. And also know that the dosage may need to be increased or decreased over time as well. So if a doctor is sort of that example I gave earlier, if the doctor said, I need you to take 25 milligrams of CBD 3 times a day for 3 months, I've had patients say, like, does that mean I'm going to have to be on this for the rest of my life? It's like, no, we will work with the doctor and see what happens after those 3 months. So again, cannabis use is very individual. It's very variable with how people start, what dosage they actually get up to that they find therapeutic, and even whether they need to increase the dose 3 months from now or decrease the dose in 3 weeks from now. Again, that's ongoing education as the person that's using it starts to get some results or not getting any results. So it's a very personal thing that has to be approached on a individual by individual basis. So a little bit of advice if you're an educator that's working with a patient. Again, just to kind of summarize a few things that we talked about here, because these are really important, not only for liability issues for you as a non-medical professional, but also just to help advance the medical cannabis industry without giving it a bad name. So as an educator, if we give some bad advice or make certain claims about the product, that gives reason for people who are still against the product or want to kind of maintain prohibition of it. It just gives them kind of fuel for the fire to say, like, hey, this educator said that this product was going to cure their cancer, and so they didn't even pursue any other routes, and then they died in 3 months, right? And so it's not something that you want to be responsible for. And I don't want to scare you as an educator to say, like, hey, you shouldn't ever be making any recommendations, but we do have to be very aware of responsible use and always err on the side of caution, rather than going out and making blatant statements or kind of outrageous claims about it, because again, we just don't know what we don't know. So again, just be careful with your advice. Be very thoughtful about how you're advising patients to use the product, and if possible, form that relationship with the patient's healthcare provider and work in conjunction with them to make sure that your patients and clients are getting the best care possible, so we can have the best outcomes possible from medical cannabis use. And that will help to not only help your client and your patient, but it will also help to advance the use of medical cannabis within Canada and around the world.